Welcome, everyone. It's so amazing to see your beautiful faces. I love these group of people. So my name is Latishia James. I am the program director at Move to End Violence. And right now I have with me ML Daniel, Heidi Maria Lopez, and Patricia Torres, all of whom have been a part of an amazing legacy at Move to End Violence of healing, justice, and spirit care, weaving, and work. And so today we're going to have a little jam session of sorts, a little conversation about some of those contributions, about the evolutions at MEV around healing justice and spirit care, and about what the future of healing justice and spirit care really is all about for movement in general, right? Like what is being called forth as we try to live more and more into healing centered leadership and legacies in movement. And so before I ask the first question and give them a chance to introduce themselves, I do want to name some other folks who couldn't be a part of this conversation today, but whose contributions are also vital and will be reflected in the Healing Justice Toolkit in some way. People like Norma Wong, people like Becky Masaki, people like Amate, people like Kifu Farouk, Agua Dulce, Gina Breedlove, Naimah Efia, Dona Hilona, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And so we just want to bring their spirits into this space, knowing that they are also a part of this legacy and a part of this work. Thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you for these contributions that you have been making, that you continue to make, both to Move to End Violence and to the movement as a whole, as healing justice practitioners. So we're gonna get into it. So this first question is, usually simple but complex. Who you be, right? And in addition to who you be, what is your healing and spirit care lineage? And ML, we're going to start with you.
It's always a delight to be in the conversation of other spiritualists. And so I'm glad to be here this afternoon. I'm ML Daniel, she, her, we, and coming in from the land of the Duwamish. And spiritual lineage, my goodness. I mean, when I read that question, I thought, I grew up in the Black church. And so that's a whole mouthful unto itself of what anchors me, what formed me, what created the person that I am today, and how I show up in space with spirit. And so I come from a long line of ministers. It took me 20 years to meander my way into my own ministry, running from it in ways that made sense to me at the time, but doesn't make sense to me now as I sit here today. But nothing is ever wasted. And so you think about how you arrive at the moment you find yourself in, of standing fully in ministry. And so I come from a long line of Black ministers who live an embodied practice of what it means to be present with spirit, and have an expectation of spirit showing up everywhere. And so I live that as part of my own understanding of how I show up as a spiritualist, is that spirit is present everywhere. And so that is the care with which I care for other people, is to find the spirit in them and to connect to the spirit in a way that allows for there to be that holy dance, that fullness of spirit in the room, that allows for it to have voice and body all at once. So I bring that. And when I joined MEV, I brought that to movement space. And when I didn't find it in movement space, I called it forward because it was something that was eager to be in the room in ways that was noticeable, palpable, and alive, not just in words, but actually alive, an embodied experience of it. And so when I think about, my own spirit care and spirit lineage, it was formed in the church. And it has, and for me, church nowadays takes a whole different form. Church is not the building, and it never has been. It really is the people. It's the community. it's the energy, and that energy takes form in many places, which allows me to play with, you mentioned Normal Wong earlier. It allows me to play with my Buddhist friends because the energy is the same, and so I can find church in the temple. I can find church in the synagogue. I can find church in the streets. I can find church in the club if I look hard enough. And so it is the people, it is the energy, it is the effervescence of it overflowing and bubbling up in places that you didn't anticipate for it to be. It's the land. And so those are the things that I think about when I think about where my spirit finds care, and how I extend care is through, connection with other people, connection with land, connection with all beings, and really tapping into that life-giving energy that exists everywhere. I'm going to invite you in, Sister Heidi.
Thank you. Gracias, buenas. I'm really happy to be here with y'all. Feliz aquí con ustedes. Heidi Maria Lopez, she, her, ella. I'm currently on Muscogee Creek lands in Georgia, in the United States. En este momento estoy en la tierra de la Muscogee Creek, en Georgia. Pero mi gente son de la República Dominicana, del lado de la República Dominicana, en la isla de Haití. But my people are from the island of the Dominican Republic, on the island of Haiti, on the side of the Dominican Republic. And I am born and raised in New York City and Washington Heights in particular, just so you know, nacida y criada in Washington Heights and Nueva York. And so those are very distinct places. These are all very distinct places that take part in, have shaped, and continue to shape my spiritual lineage, what it looks like, my faith, etc., and how I do this work. Esos sitios importan porque o me han creado, hasta este momento han creado cómo yo practico, o están dando influencia en este momento en cómo yo practico cualquier cosa que tiene que ver con fe y espiritualidad para mí, y justicia. So who I be is a person of those places. I'm shaped by every one of those places. Yo soy una persona que está, que importa que yo soy de cada uno de esos lugares. And also the daughter of immigrants from the island of Haiti. That has also shaped me in terms of who my ancestors are. Siendo una hija de inmigrante que vinieron de la isla de Haití, del lado de la República Dominicana también, ha contribuido a quien yo soy. There's something, I want to say something about New York in particular, like being born and raised in New York has shaped the way that my, what did this question say, spiritual care looks like? Because it looks very much like reading people. It looks very much like being very honest. And I would say that is, being a vessel, like being open to messages and then delivering them as I see fit. But really, all of that being shaped by being from New York as well. Yo creo que siendo de cada uno de estos sitios, pero específicamente de Nueva York, ha contribuido en cómo yo practico mi fe, porque creo que una de las maneras en cual eso se ha manifestado es que yo siento como que yo soy una persona que está abierta a diferentes mensajes, y yo lo digo de la manera que yo quiera decirlo, de que se aparezcan, pero que parte de eso es mi personalidad y parte de eso es siendo nacida y criada en Nueva York específicamente. And so I'm very much my parents' daughters, my grandparents' grandchild. So the people I come from also have shaped and made me who I am and how I practice. Because particularly the women, I would say, have held a very strong faith tradition tied to Catholicism. Yo diría que siendo que la mujer en mi familia específicamente, sí, toda la gente en mi familia, pero específicamente las mujeres que han tenido una práctica religiosa, que específicamente católica, has created a very strong faith practice to me that is now grounds itself similarly to what you said, Mel, in Christianity. Mi práctica en este momento, por esas tradiciones, está enraizado profundamente en ser cristiana. Y ser cristiana de una manera radical. So, yo pienso en gente como James Cone, o mucha de la gente que yo he oído cantar gospel music, música cristiana en los Estados Unidos, específicamente afroamericano. Eso profundamente toca mi espíritu de una manera que yo ni puedo, es difícil alguna vez ponerlo en palabras. Yo, me siento califrío diciéndolo, me siento conectada a Dios, a mi propósito y a la manera de cual yo puedo hacer este trabajo cuando yo escucho ese tipo de música. So I would say that the manifestations of that now has been people like James Cone talking about specifically Black liberation theology. I think about queer theology. I think about the ways that Christianity is very radical in the ways that I practice it and feel it, and that I felt that mostly in the ways that I would hear gospel music, specifically coming from Black churches growing up in the United States. And then being deeply connected to land, that's where it comes back to. So, practicing with earth medicine, the elements, plants, herbs, trees, etc., is something that was passed down to me, something that I continue, but that comes from being a people that continues to be connected to land very deeply. Entonces, yo diría que la manera de cual se manifiesta también está conectada profundamente a la tierra, que yo soy de gente yo vengo de gente de cuales los lugares en cuales nosotros estamos importan y tienen un efecto en cómo nosotros somos, pero también cómo nos aparecemos en el mundo y el fe que tenemos o no tenemos. So, trabajando con hierba, plantas, los elementos, todo eso tiene que ver con cómo yo practico, pero viene de la gente de cual yo vengo. So yes, a little bit about both who I be, and then because of who I be, how I practice or how this work shows up in this particular moment. And I will bring Patti into the conversation.
Ooh, thank you. Thank you, Heidi and Amel, for sharing. I'm getting inspired just listening. And thank you for having this conversation and hosting this conversation. Let's see. I am Patricia or Patti, they, she, ella or ella. I am a person who cares for land, and that includes bodies, human bodies and other, more than human, land, spirit, and words, and all of the relationships that are engaged in those aspects of being alive. And who I be. Let's see. I think that, yeah, my lineage very much shapes that. I have chosen and blood ancestors that I work with regularly. And so coming from the Chicana Indígena side, I have a grandmother who recently passed, Sylvia, who was of Otomi heritage and descendants. And but I've also studied a lot of the work of a curandera named Teresa Urea, who also in the same central northern, what today is called Mexico, similarly, like Heidi said, was sort of born into a Catholic world. But my grandmother and Teresa really practiced a syncretic version of indigenous Catholicism and folk Catholicism and earth Catholicism, or earth medicine and spirit. And so I very much call on them and learn from them. And then on my Irish lineage, I really have been working more with both an ancestor I recently just found out about. Her name is Honora. She's my great, 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 great grandmother who was an herbalist, but also folks like Biddy Early, who was an herbalist in Ireland, and Daniel O'Connell, who was someone who went to Biddy Early for her medicines and insight and healing, but also he was known as the Great Liberator. And so in Ireland, because of the way colonialism hit, they were not allowed to practice Roman Catholicism. And so he, I guess all of these folks are sort of managing this religiosity that, as both ML and Heidi named, is like part of Christianity and very much a part of imperialism, and how my peoples are negotiating their ongoing relationship with spirit and land and each other that was there before these violences came. Yeah, so that's very much the lineage those are the ancestors I work with, the context I am in, and through those relationships, my spirit care and healing have really manifested through various forms of caring for spirit and land and bodies and and words. And so a lot of my coming up spiritually was through my politics, and specifically with feminists of color against violence, that was started here in the US, what is called the US, by Native and Black and migrant and Muslim and disabled women and people well, this was in the late 90s and early 2000s, but women and people who identified as women. And that's how sort of it was framed. And we have, at that turn of the century, it was a deepening. I used to call it my spiritual coming out. I didn't realize how deeply tied the violences that I experienced, my friends, my family, and my ancestors were so tied also to my healing and spirit work and my desire to tend to life, both mine and others, and the connections that I feel to land. Like Heidi was saying, these aren't just things that are written somewhere. These are like felt experiences. Yeah, and so it was through insight and through my own work as a survivor from childhood sexual violence, but also in community, that I've gotten to see that spirit and healing and care work are in these everyday practices and imaginings that we do together. And I will pass it to Naimah.
I typed some notes in the chat so that if I have to go off, you'll have some of what I'm going to offer. Thank you all so much. I'm so grateful to hear more of your connection to this work, because sometimes we don't talk about this part. We just jump in and start building together. So it feels really good to hear and to ground my connection to you all in this understanding. I'm gonna put these notes in here and just go back and forth between them. And because Virgo, that's just what happens. So I am Naimah Efia. I be Naimah Efia. Black mom, and that means MOM, which is the mama of multiples. Brooklyn born and raised, deep lover, bringer of connection and care, mermaid put on land to reckon with the grief of our people and transform pain into possibility, unafraid to go deep and find the siren song that only spirit can sing straight to our souls. And I just want to contextualize that a little bit, because a big part of my work is around mental health and psychic healing. And for a lot of us in our tradition, there was no mental health, there was no clinical frame within which that work was done. There was going to spirit and working with spirit around people whose relationship with spirit had been disrupted. So what we today oftentimes call mental illness, historically with our people, has actually been disruptions in their relationships with spirit and the need for guidance and holding inside of that. So I do believe that part of the going deep is really like reconnecting people to spirit and reconnecting people to that aspect of themselves, because they can't really break out of or break through what is causing distress or causing unwellness for them without going to spirit, or without letting spirit work in them and through them. Because it's probably already, spirit probably is already at work, and that's the thing that they're fighting against. So I be endlessly looking to spirit for the way of making this new world we are all dreaming about and we're building to manifest together. And I say that inside of like a real hopelessness that I feel sits inside of liberation-based work for people of color, and Black folks in particular, especially up against the levels and layers of harm that sits inside of this space because of this pain, this grief that lives among us that, you know, folks are still working through, and hurting people. And I think people oftentimes aren't sure what the movement can do anymore, or what, you know, why go to the movement for way making and possibilities. And I think the necessity is that spirit be woven in to create some of the medicine that has been missing, and to remedy some of these illnesses and these ailments that have actually been disrupting the movement and actually taking us so far from the freedom that we say we want, and that we wrote all this theory about, and that we can talk so well about, but in practice looks kind of messy sometimes. And not just messy in the way that humanity is messy, but messy in the way that we're not careful all the time with one another. So yeah, so I just think Demel and Gina and I talked about this a little bit at the Sunset convening, that like that going to spirit is like the thing that's going to basically save the movement, or, you know, essentially assure that we actually get free from all this work that we've been doing for so long, and all this work that our ancestors have been doing. And I come from a lineage of heartbroken Black mamas, creating miracles and manifesting the wholly impossible out of next to nothing in terms of capitalism and material resources and wealth. The dopest witches ever, who would never call themselves witches, but who just like, I just am so in awe of my grandmothers and great grandmothers and my own mother, and all the mothers that are connected to our ancestry and our lineage. It's just, nothing is impossible with them. That's just like, and if it is, it's not because it truly is in life, it's because they don't want it to be right now. You know, so there's a fearlessness and an unrelenting search for spirit that I have because of what I watched them do and make manifest in their own lives for my ancestors and for me. So that lineage also holds a great deal of illness that went unseen, unmet with care, and layered itself into the way families were raised. So there's a lot of psychic warfare that my lineage has been holding for generations. And I do believe a big part of my call was to disrupt that legacy, and not just for me, but for our whole people. Because I think that is something that continues to get handed down, and not just through genealogy, but like through practice. And so if we steep our practice in spirit, we begin disrupting that almost instantly. So a big part of who I am and who I be and how I want to be in the world, or how I aspire or aim to be in the world, is someone who is very real about how ill people are and how unwell people are, and how much that has been woven into people's histories and realities. And also someone who believes that we can break that stronghold, and that it might not be something that we can like see made manifest in some big way, but progress isn't something you usually see in real time. It's something that you look back and be like, oh wow, this is so different from the way I was raised, or the way my parents took me to church for the first time, or the way my parent told me to clear out energy in the house, or my parent was doing this, but doesn't call it clearing out the energy in the house. So yeah, I think, no one in my lineage would say that they're practicing traditional African medicine. No one in my lineage would say that they're witches. No one in my lineage would say that they're doing magic. That's what they're doing. And the things that I have done spiritually before I even knew what they were steeped in terms of tradition were because I saw them doing it. I saw them smoking the house. I saw them sweeping out the doorways. I saw them putting water under beds and in corners. So those traditions feel really powerful and potent to me, and woven into the ways that we've been doing this spiritual warfare. I also come from a long line of praying heart church folk. And I say that because it's like, did you pray on it? Well, we've been praying on it. You want to pray about it? I already prayed about it. I'm gonna pray more for you. It's just our way. And people who don't even realize they're praying in my family, who I'll just be sitting next to them, and all of a sudden I'll be like, they're talking, but they're actually just praying. Which is something that I didn't realize, but I actually do. And I noticed it until my kids started doing it. And I was like, oh, because your kids do everything they see you do. And they just start like whisper kind of praying and talking to spirit. And I was like, okay, this is like something that lives in our family. So yeah, praying heart, church folk who love the Lord, and look to the Lord for their strength, their guidance, and to locate themselves in any given moment of strife. So when something happens that like just don't make no sense, they look to God or the gospel or scripture to help make sense out of the nonsense. And so I've had my different relations and orientations to the church throughout my life and throughout different moments in my own recovery journey and my own healing journey. And I have also found great possibility and waymaking and power in scripture, in gospel, in prayer. And I will say that the strongest and most powerful thing that it's done for me is that it's created a bridge to our more ancestral and traditional practices in medicine. I don't think I could have gotten there if I wasn't inside of my practices with the church and inside such a deep and potent relationship with the Lord. So that's who I be, and I'm closing there. Thank you. And the baby's still sleeping, yay.
Yay. Yay for it. Oh, shh. Yes. Ashe. Oh, thank you, all of you. I have chills. I'm feeling so deeply connected. I feel spirit. All of y'all shared in your responses. I heard talk of land, right? The importance of the connection to land, ancestors, making a way out of no way faith, right? That Black women and femmes and other people of color have. And then also this healing the disconnection with spirit that was caused by colonization is a thread. that I'm also picking up with all of you. And that's something that deeply resonates with me as well. Also come from a long line of praying church folk, right? Who love the Lord. As my grandmother would say, my Jesus. I love my Jesus. So I understand as well. And I agree with you, Naimah. I think there is something to be said about the way that our folk kept that connection to the past through, right, this colonized faith. I definitely think there's something to be said about that. And so I want to go ahead and jump into the next question. And I think, given everything that you've shared that has already been so rich, what do y'all feel like is the spiritual mandate for movements in this time?
Before we move there, I have another thought. I just have been most sitting here just enjoying the conversation around the women who anchored the spirituality that we now stand in.
Hmm.
Everybody's story was tethered together in a way around that kitchen table praying folk, or those kitchen table people who are creating that magic, who helped to begin to form the magic we currently stand in and that we carry forward, or that we embody. And I just am always mesmerized by the church basement sisters who were in the basement of the church doing the church business, kind of sort of, but was feeding the people and clothing the children and making sure folks had daycare and childcare and all those other things, and how that showed up in houses, and how they would have their circle of sister friends in the community that were waymakers with them. And that was, as my mama said, she had her circle of prayer warriors that she knew, people who could get a prayer through. When they needed to get a prayer through, they could get a prayer through. But I'm just mesmerized by how that is a common theme in this circle of powerful spiritualist folk who are standing in their own stream of giftedness, but clearly standing in the stream of somebody else's gift that has already been laid. And so I just couldn't let that moment pass without that acknowledgement that of the stream we're standing in, and the recognition that, we may be standing in what is considered a colonized, some of us anyway, myself standing in a very colonized tradition. But what I know to be true coming out of the Black tradition is that we overlaid all of those traditional things that they wouldn't let us practice on top of. And we still see them living inside of Black church today in ways that defy explanation. But if we just peel it back a bit, we see the traditional medicines, we see the traditional practices, we see the traditional praise, and all those things that continue to live on in ways that are feeding us. And I think it feeds the movement. I think it feeds the movement, and in my own personal opinion, it is what the movement is in need of at the moment. We had gotten so disconnected from spirit in ways in movement space, so busy trying to replicate and emulate other systems, that we disconnected from the very essence and the power that created us and allowed us to be able to make it to this moment. And so I am of the opinion and firmly stand in the stream of, if movement space has any hope of reclaiming its authority, its power, it has to be reconnected to spirit. We need to figure out, how do we help folks reclaim their own, name their own, and then stand in it in a way that allows for them to stand fully and whole. So just loving the conversation about how the mamas and the sisters and the aunties and whatnot has formed who we are as folks of faith and folks that are standing in the stream of spirit.
Ashe, Ashe. Thank you so much for that, ML, and thank you for the, making sure that we stayed in that energy for a moment, and then make the loop back, because you connected it all too to the next question as well, right? About what it is that movements are needing, what is the spiritual mandate for this time, and also the Sankofa of it all, right? Of like needing to go back and bring it forward constantly, right? It's not a one-time thing. It's constant, and that when we talk about the overlay and the syncretism, we see it everywhere. And I think too, each of you did that within Move to End Violence spaces as well, with physical spirit space, with your offerings, right? I feel like I saw a lot of that in what you brought, a lot of that weaving and overlay of what you brought into that space also. So I've seen a lot of nodding, and I feel like people taking notes. I want to call in some other voices as either follow-up, or if you want to respond to this next question of, what is the spiritual mandate for movements in this time?
And as soon as you asked the question, I wrote down broadening and reckoning. I feel like, to some degree, there, a broadening of definitions of what things can look like when we're talking about, what is spiritual work is needed to be able to challenge ourselves and to hold ourselves accountable to not staying within things looking a certain way. So I think that I think it was you, Emma, who said earlier, in the club, if I look hard enough, I didn't have to look hard in the club. It was clear to me spirit was there, because if you replace, the beat that was playing at whatever time in queer club in New York, Escuelita or Heaven or the Fun House or Crash, when I was growing up, if you replace that beat with the full gospel band, it's the Holy Spirit that was in that place. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there needs to be a broadening of what we are saying is spirit work in order to be able to have it include all of us. Right. And I think that cannot happen without a reckoning, because then I also feel like, all right, are we getting so loose that now everything is spiritual work? And is it really though? And is it really connected to our liberation? Right? Because there's a way that these ideas of like self-care and even, healing, now everything is a class and a subscription. And, well, if this is for my care, but you didn't show up to any of your political commitments for the purpose of your care, are we really in this for liberation? So I think that there's a way that without a reckoning of that includes accountability and that keeps liberation as the purpose of this work, which is again how we came to it, like Naimah said, I'm praying for you, we checking who prayed. That's a phone tree. That's organizing 1-to-1. That's organizing 101, right? It wasn't just, they had organizing principles to this thing that they didn't call organizing principles, but we knew what the fuck was going on. So I think that there was a broadening and a reckoning that we've lost the reckoning and the broadening. And I think that people who tend to want a reckoning, unfortunately, are doing that so narrowly that it turns off and oftentimes intentionally leaves behind too many of our people, right? It leaves behind the way that Black folk want to practice, because of course, Blackness is always demonized in a society and in places and spaces where anti-Blackness is just woven in. Of course, we only want to co-op and have the cute apparel that we can buy of indigenous practices because that's what capitalism will do. So that is a reckoning that is very myopic and leaves behind queer people, indigenous people, Black people, because it will always demonize them within a system of capitalism that is anti-Black. So I feel like both are necessary, and they really, for me, are how I roll. I think that there also is a way that sometimes we can absolve the practitioner from the practices, and that to me is very problematic. There's a way that, again, in a broadening of who can take up space and be an authority has broadened, so that some folks who were never given the mic have constructed their own and created their platforms. And then also you're like, but I know you for real and in real life and in real person, this is not you. Outside of these 90 minutes for this class and the subscription, I know you fucking shit up out here in the streets. People know you for real, and they know that you're not anything you just said that you do. So I'd rather just, if for me, it's like, I'd rather not be that public persona, you know what I'm saying? And if it means that I somehow being that is really asking me to be inauthentic in a way that I literally cannot, but also we're within a capitalist system, so people got to do what they got to do to put food on the plate. This is very complex. So I'm really saying that, really holding myself within this, right? I'm not saying it as if it's just I'm just saying out to other people. I'm saying I'm having these conversations to myself. Am I broadening my practices enough? Am I getting caught up in what this looks like and not really following what I'm being told to do because I want to do it the way that I want to do that feels comfortable and good? And then who supports me in my reckoning? Who holds me accountable? That is also organizing 101. To whom are you accountable, right? Because again, I think that there's a way that I and anyone else can show up on the scene and have a lot to say and not necessarily be practicing and living those values out. And I think we see that too much in our movements, and we you know, and I feel like the combination of both of those things will really do us some good. And I would say that the summary of that in Spanish is, you know, yo te conozco bacalao aunque venga disfrazado. You know, you can come dressed how you are, codfish, but I know who you are, is the literal translation of that saying. And that's the reckoning part. And you know, but the broadening is cada cual tiene su tema, you know. Each person is going to have their own way, and if you're doing that in community, then the richness of each person is going to contribute to the richness of the practice in the community, punto y final. You know, so when we leave people behind, we leave the richness and diversity and complexity of folks showing up with their practices that enriches the entire community, right? So cada cual tiene su tema. We all got to bring that tema. We gotta have that practice within us that will then end up enriching our community.
The bars, so many. Thank you. I want to put a pin for the spiritual accountability piece that Heidi, right, is bringing up, of what that looks like amongst us as practitioners, spiritualists, right? What is the community of accountability? Because to Naimah's point earlier, the people come to movement out because of harm, right? They've been harmed by systems, and then they come into movement because they're trying to fight for liberation and heal the harm from systems, to only to get harmed by movement, right? And then that creates another conundrum. And so now you're having to heal from systems and heal from movement. And that's a lot of people's stories, right? I've been harmed within movement. I've caused harm. There's different things, right? And layers of like my own accountability as well of that question. So wanting to weave that in as we're continuing the conversation. So Naimah, Bati, please come on in.
I'd like to share a somewhat incomplete thought, but connected to this piece around spiritual, or around accountability, which for me is always spiritual and political and holistic, and messy and being figured out. And there's a thinker that I've been listening to recently while I walk my, as Latishia called Pumpkin, my pet dog, my human dog. I've been listening to Bayo Akomolafe, who is a thinker based in somewhere in West Africa, I'm not entirely sure, but also does a lot of travel and podcasting, and I believe is the son of, or was raised in Christianity, excuse me, and has since, sort of how ML you said, has had a meandering practice of ministry and thinking and speaking and practicing. And so one of the things that he said recently, thinking about his rooting in Yoruba peoples and practices and spirituality, that like many of us raised in some sort of Christianity have been taught to think of God as something out there that's going to hold us accountable, or that is going to be our moral compass, or is going to help with our people's moral compass. And what I'm hearing from us, and what I heard him say, and it really resonated from what our aunties and queer uncles or moms or dads have been doing, is something more like the accountability happens and has moments of solidification while we're in the practice. And there has to be relationship, and there has to be communication. And yes, there's often principles, but they're not necessarily the ones that are on the mission statement or on the website or somehow produced for capitalism to look at. You know, they're not these neat and tidy things. And it's just, it really also resonated for how I feel like I saw MEV working, you know, and having to also navigate what does it mean to be this institution that on one hand needs to be public and accountable, but is also working out things where just because there's the internet doesn't mean we have to put everything out all the time, you know, and it complicates things. And it doesn't. It's like spirit is here. And so he calls it like, one of the things he would say is the moment's calling. I just listened to this morning, is bringing God down to earth and remembering that we are all aspects of God. And so we're Godding together. And that really helped me, one, because we call what my dog does Godding, because he's just this delicious creature who reminds us about the fucking privilege to be alive amongst all the hell and pain, you know? But yeah, so just this piece around like, this is an active practice. We're like practicing, rehearsing how to be with one another. And some of us might have cultures and traditions that have very clear scripture or ways of being, but even those still need to be worked out in a particular context. And, you know, like where our different social positions are going to shape the situation or the different ways that harm may have played out. And so there's just something around spiritual accountability, getting lost, obviously, in the ways that capitalism encourages and forces things, but also something around like, it's an ongoing unfinished project that we are relating and working together. And it is about bringing, I mean, God is already here, you know, like Heidi was saying, like I can go to the bar and I see it. And there's so many things, anti-Black racism, patriarchal violence, so many things that have tried to keep us from perceiving the sacred and that we are sacred. But yeah, there's something about, there is no moral, and this fucked me up for a while, but like, if we stop looking elsewhere, especially to some like white blue-eyed God, which I did grow up doing, you know, until I was around 10, like, what does it mean when we're bringing that into our bodies and into our relationships? And at MEV, I saw it self-identify as a living, breathing thing, like maybe not thing, creature, you know, like a part of an ecosystem. Yes, it's an organization, but it's also all of these people who are trying and bumping up and not agreeing sometimes and harming each other, figuring out what to put out publicly. Like that to me felt like sacred work. And we did have some shared principles around, there goes my dog, that were important to keep coming back to. But those were created by the folks at MEV. Those principles were grounded in the work of Black and Native and migrant and Asian and disabled survivors of violence and traditions.
Thank you. The question is so important in terms of what is the mandate. And I always say healing, but I think in having this conversation with you all, I'm pulling out additional things that I also always say, but not necessarily in the context of the mandate. But Patty, you named two things that I think are definitely important. And then I'm gonna also bring in one of the things that Heidi named. You said there has to be practice and there has to be relationship. And I think those two things are mandates. And inside of that, that people need to be in a practice of self-reckoning, a practice of self-study, and a practice of self-accountability before you are in all of those processes in practice with somebody else. So I think there needs to be a mandate for practice, not just language, rhetoric, and books upon books upon books, or articles upon articles upon articles and TED Talks or whatever, but actual practice, like living it. Yeah, and so I think the mandate needs to be for practice. The practice needs to begin with self-reckoning, self-study, self-accountability, because how are you holding somebody else accountable when you can't even explore accountability with yourself? And it's hard. It's not easy because like there is no blueprint for it. There is no mechanism that's available to us for it, other than spirit, right? Which is like oftentimes a place where I can do some of that work. And if I abandon it or if I go too far from it, spirit will yank me back and be like, have you sat down with us to talk about these things? What would your ancestors have to say about these decisions or these ways in which you're moving or engaging? And are you in integrity right now? And when I have to answer to them, my self-reflection and my self-reckoning is very different. And then the reckoning brings an accountability that oftentimes is a call to action. And so I have to move differently thereafter. And I think that's where the practice begins. And we have to practice like what comes out of that self-work. And then the piece that Heidi brought of like organizing 101. I think those things actually live inside of organizing 101 is like locating yourself and creating relationship and establishing your foundation and exploring accountability, like who you're going to be accountable to, like those things are actually organizing 101. And I think somehow people have been jumping over and through that or bypassing it in some way and are now writing books on organizing 137, organizing 138, organizing 139. And they haven't actually sat and practiced organizing 101. They're not living in a practice of organizing 101. So I think the mandate is to return to spirit, which is to return to where we start, right? Because spirit calls us into this work, right? So go back to where you started, very Sankofa, like you said, Latishia, go back to where you started. And if you can't get there, then find the places through your ancestry and through your lineage that will bring you back there. Because I can say for myself, when I went home to the continent in 2019, I got realigned in a way that I couldn't do in the United States on this soil. So there may be also ways in which people have to actually physically be inside of a different space or a different experience on different land, touching different medicine in order to tap into that. And I think that's a mandate too. I think we should have funds for people to travel home. I think, people can heal much more expeditiously when we're on our own soil and our own land with our own people. So I think that should be a mandate as well. But practice, self-reckoning, self-work in general, organizing 101 and returning home or returning to spirit in some way that is like physically made manifest.
Ashe. Thank you. I want to know if there's like stuff, what's coming up for folks right now before I offer another question and start to wind us down. ML, you look like you had a thought.
Just a wonderful conversation. I agree with Heidi on the need to make it spacious enough for folks to locate themselves inside the tent and not to make it exclusive in a way that excludes people from being able to reclaim their own wholeness and to reclaim their own space and to reclaim their own footing. I would tag on to Heidi's second piece of, the liberation piece to say, we can be liberated and then still not be in a place of, and not be life-giving. Folks can be liberated and it's not life-giving, and one of the hallmarks for me of deeply spiritual work and people engaged in their spiritual work in a way that is in integrity is that it's life-giving, that it returns to people that place of wholeness that was missing. That's a miss. So not only am I free, but I now have a new life bubbling up in me in a way that I didn't have previously. And so I think definitely in the expansiveness, and I guess in movement space, I am challenged by the conflation of healing and spirit work. Because I can be healed and it has nothing to do with being spiritually connected. Healing can take place and it's not spiritually connected. But there's something that happens when you have connected somebody spiritually and that healing takes place that allows that liberation and that life-giving piece to happen. And so those two then become tagged together, that allows for a new way of being and a new way of moving and a new way of being in a relationship. And I also understand, in my own experience of practicing as a practitioner, is that spirit, when it invites you into the tent to play as a practitioner, it invites you into a tent to play with others who are going to always call you to accountability, who will always be able to speak truth into you in a way that you may not be able to hear it at the moment, but it will find a place in you because you're engaged in some level of reflection. And they're going to invite you into a place of reflection when you're out of integrity. So I know very few people who are doing spiritual work in a silo and doing it well, because it really is a relational container. It was designed to be relational. It was designed to reconnect those missing pieces that were disconnected for us by colonialism or whatever the situation may be. but it was designed to be relational. And so all of the stuff that just was shared a few minutes ago is all intertwined with one another in a way that sits in the container of relationship. And spirit creates those relationships that allow for that fullness to happen.
Thank you, Emil. And for people who are watching this video, this recording, right after this conversation has happened, just so y'all know, we're also being very active in the chat. So Naimah just shared, that it's a whole sermon out here, which it is. I agree wholeheartedly. It is a whole sermon. These are brilliant, brilliant folks, right? And like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, we are also being held energetically and spiritually by other people who have been a part of the MEV container of supporting healing justice work, supporting spirit care work. Monica Dennis also being one of those folks, who's co-director at Move to End Violence, and who would have loved to be a part of this conversation as well, but constantly, right, has been a force around this very thing that we're talking about of when we're talking about the accountability and the spirit and the lineages and who is it that we are bringing into the room with us wherever we go. How are we making those connections, those relationships, and really, how are we building? Right? Because knowing that nothing we're talking about is new, nothing is being created from scratch, right? This is a building upon of many legacies. It's a reclamation of things, and really trying to bring them about in a new way, but they're not, the concepts themselves are not new, for sure. And so as we start to wind down our time, yes, breathe it in, breathe it in. Thank you, Pati. I want to focus on each of you as individuals a little bit. And I want to know how it is you feel that what you each have contributed, both to MEV and to movement, around healing and spirit care, healing justice, has already created ripple effects. What are the ripple effects that you are already seeing?
Well, I think part of this is like when don't ask me, you gotta ask other people. But from where I'm at, I would say that to the point that several of y'all have made during this time, I think that there's a way that we can sort of separate, like, here are the healers, or go make an appointment with the healers, and then here are the people that are facilitating the political education sessions. And I'm really grateful to Monica Dennis and Rachel Ibrahim, who brought me into this world of MEV, who are folks who do this work without siloing, as you were saying, ML, who really embody and live what they have created is the language around liberatory practices, and that they are, again, to speak to what you said about not everything that is healing is necessarily spiritual, but that they are deeply spiritually connected people. And I feel like that's what brought us into circle with each other and how we do this work. And so when we talk about circling folks up to have conversations about race and other systems of oppression, it was always a spirit-filled space. That was the point, was how do we as individuals bring that aspect of ourselves in, however it manifests, because we each have our own practices and connections to spirit around that, to be able to have circle that can have creator, God, universe, Madre Tierra, however you identify this energy that is larger than us, that is going to move forward this work of liberation. That really is what we've been up to. And so I just appreciate having been with folks in practice with folks for so long. And in this particular space, that really, there was no siloing. That was the work. And I would hope, and our prayer has been that when we have circled up with people, whether it was immediately in the room, folks being able to access healing that they needed because of the spiritual work that was happening around undoing the impact of systems of oppression, but also accessing lineages of resistance, which is something that is, again, often left out of the conversation. When you're not having a conversation about spirit, you're only going to look at the harm, because you are disconnected from the holy moving power and gravity of something bigger than us. Yeah, I feel like that has, we've seen it, we've felt it, and sometimes it's been in the moment, and sometimes it's taken literal years to be able to get the feedback of, you know, what this work has done. And again, just speaking for myself, I feel like it has absolutely deepened my faith to be in equity work. It has transformed me to be thinking and living through and in intention around my behaviors, given what I've known, what I've been able to deepen politically. It has deepened my faith and vice versa. As my faith deepens, the more risk I'm willing to take in my organizing work. That's how those have contributed to each other. And that is what I've borne witness to up to this point, and what I pray can continue to go on.
I'd like to share next. Gosh, I guess the spirit moved me, because here we go. Yay, baby. I guess I was really feeling and resonating with the piece that Heidi was sharing about their presence in the MEV ecosystem, along with Monica and Rachel. And so one of the pieces that I was invited to bring, or it's not a piece, but I was invited to show up with the fullest self that I had and that I am. And so, you know, when I first met with Monica, I had come on to help with sort of logistics and operations and finance. And even in organizations, these are often very different than who is doing programming and facilitation and these things. And that is not, you know, or organizing with Insight for so many years, and the work I had done was never really siloed like that. And so my first meeting with Monica helped me understand that she was coming with spirit, and that the finance and the operations, the way that I held it with my cells, this is part of the spiritual work of growing an institution, which in some way is natural. It's flowing from human ingenuity and working together, you know. We're growing this thing to make life more possible and less harmful for folks, and specifically Black folks, Native folks, women, poor folks. And I guess the gift of being seen by Monica, literally in our first meeting, but like me, sort of helped me with the disillusionment I had of working in nonprofits and seeing, oh, this is a place that we can work as spiritual beings, and down to the ways that we're hosting or curating space. These are also political decisions. Logistics can be political. This is an important place to bring in intersectional frameworks, to have reckoning conversations, not just in that retreat that's like 1 week out of the year, but on Tuesday morning's meeting, we're going to discuss colorism, whiteness, you know, ableism. And I feel like in other spaces, especially nonprofits, that is not welcomed, that is not allowed. And so, so I guess my contribution only comes because there was a context that invited it, that that Monica Dennis and so many others, I know ML also specifically, many things, but specifically around like that we are spiritual beings and we are here together. It enabled me to do the work in ways that I hope created a pool of folks who were honoring care for the self, not individual climbing ladders, but for the self, which is also care for others. And yeah, so I was really happy to see this PROPS, which is program and operations, this team form that grew both in intentionality and people, so people could step back when they needed, or people could show up extra. And it was not perfect, and it is not perfect, but this is where I hope that kind of context is what I hope we continue to see, is more and more people being able to name their boundaries, their capacities, their genius, and sort of a rotating of leadership and roles, and all done with care and spirit. And so I got to participate in that. I got to contribute that. And again, it's because I felt the depth of the context I was coming into. Thank you. Is it all right if Pumpkin the dog is here? Okay.
Hi, pumpkin. I echo, and hi, baby, on Heidi's end. Hopefully, baby will come on at some point. And I echo that the intentionality and intention holding and keeping that Monica brings or has brought definitely made it spirit driven and spirit woven throughout. And you can feel when it not slips in some way, shape, or form. And Monica's also, in my experience, very diligent in bringing that back. Like not, because it's like there are a lot of organizations or groups or people who like actually can be intentioned in that way and be spirit driven in that way. And then it starts to slip and it doesn't get caught, it just keeps slipping. And then the practices of capitalism, et cetera, just take hold. And I will say that in response to the question, what we've contributed that, what ripple effects live beyond what we've offered and contributed. And I would say that practice is one of the ripple effects. What I've found after each convening, the next time I was back with the folks in the new convening setting or another movement space, was that they all will come to me and say, like, these are the practices that I took from what you offered in spirit space or what we did together in this space or what we did on this day, and that I still do this. I still have my travel altar and I set it up in my room earlier, and I actually invited someone to come and put something on it before they went down because they were feeling distressed about something. So I'd say one of the ripple effects is practice. People were given back tools, and not just through my contributions, I think through the entire ecosystem of MEV. People got practices, people got tools that they could use on an ongoing basis, even if they weren't in a meeting or in a movement activity necessarily, they could be practicing for their own liberation. So I would say, opportunities for practice. And then the other thing I'll say is reclamation. So like reclaiming things that people didn't know lived inside of them. And then, they would come back and be like, I actually know how to divine and I didn't realize it. And I just, I started working with the cards in that space. And then I went home and I realized that my grandmother actually would throw bones and I would find bones in different places. And then I started working with it and all of this information started flooding up to the surface and I realized all these things. So reclamation of our practices, and that includes plant medicine. People who worked with plant medicine for whatever days that we were together were then able to say, like, I feel the best I felt in terms of brain fog for the past 4 days, which means I need to continue to work with this medicine in my life. So that's a practice, and it's also a reclamation. So that's something else. It's a ripple effect, I believe. And the last ripple effect I'll say is hope. I think one of the reasons, like I think ML said it on one of our conversations, like, why are you all here? Well, because you don't say no to an MEV gathering, an MEV anything. Like you will always get something out of it. And so that to me is an energy that we don't all experience or get to experience in a lot of spaces and in a lot of liberation-based movement activities where you like, I can't wait to get back there, or like, I couldn't possibly say no, which to me is very heavily grounded or rooted in hope. Like we believe in the possibilities that come out of this space for ourselves and for the collective. And that ripple effect shows up with the number of people who come back, the number of people who are on the threads afterwards, the number of people who start building together outside of the MEV, whatever event happens. And I think hope is something that we are like, it's like water in the desert, sometimes. And I really have found that in a very profound way, MEV always somehow can stir and churn hope within me and within others. And so, and that just gets amplified by what we offer through the spirit care and the healing practices. And yeah, so I'll close there.
Kind of like the way that Heidi opened up. You have to ask other folks what the ripple effect is of my presence in the ecosystem has been. I kind of appreciate that as a response. What I would hope my contribution to the ripple effect has been in not only the MEV ecosystem, but also in movement space, is the willingness to put spirit at center and to quit talking about it in code and to call it what it is. And to allow it in its many varying manifestations and giftedness to show up in space, and to allow folks to be affirmed for showing up with all of who they are in space. So I would hope, whatever the contribution I have contributed in the MEV ecosystem, it is the willingness to really talk about spirit out in the light of day and not in the whispers of the corners. And to have people begin to see it as the piece that we left behind that we need to go back and reclaim if we ever hope to stand fully in our power as movements. And so that would be the piece that I would hope that would be my contribution long term of what it meant to be part of the MEV ecosystem, of creating a real conversation around spirit and ways it shows up and how we show up in it and how we bring it forward in the work we do, and that we don't continue to compartmentalize it, but we allow folks to begin to create, to reclaim their own, to name their own. Naming is an important thing. To be able to name your own is important, and to be able to articulate it in a way that invites others in and not repel people out. And so that would be the piece that I would hope would be the ripple.
What a note to end on. Thank you. Thank y'all so much. Truly. This has been so rich, even better than I hoped for. So thank you for saying yes. Thank you for all that you've contributed. Thank you to your little ones for allowing us the space to have an hour plus to be in conversation. And, I want to say thank you to MEV for giving me the opportunity to be in community with such amazing beings. Y'all are stuck with me for life now, by the way, just FYI. FYI. And I'm just thankful. And for my part, I will say, MEV is the first professional role that I have had in my entire career where I could bring my whole self, where I did not have to compartmentalize being a spiritualist at work. And I did not have to compartmentalize how I showed up, and where not only did I not have to compartmentalize, but where literally Monica and Priscilla were like, no, do more of that. We want to do that. Oh, you want to curate a thing for spirit? Yeah, do that. That's great. Where I could be in a meeting and I could say, so this is what I think we should do, but I don't have any other evidence to support it other than to let you know my ancestors said so. I don't. And it was accepted, and people accepted it, right? Where I didn't have to come with a PowerPoint presentation, where I could just say, well, Spirit said we shouldn't do that. And it was accepted. And so I will be forever, ever grateful for that, and for being with other people who get that spirit technology is the ultimate technology when we are doing this work. So thank y'all for your contributions. This will keep living and keep going. And we know that this spirit care work, this healing work is necessary and will continue as movement continues.